I am here today to talk about a different president. President-elect Trump, and as leader of the Green Party of Canada and as someone who is honored to be Canadian, honored to serve with the leadership of my fellow, and I do regard us as friends and fellows, opposition party leaders, with a prime minister who leads his party. We have one thing in common, and it's deep. We're Canadians. And when we approach a president-elect who has, astonishingly, decided that a first order of business is Canada bashing, this is unique. I've been thinking back over previous presidents, can't think of a single U.S. president who has ever thought a good way to start a relationship with their single largest trading partner is by insulting us. Well, never mind. We have to prepare for president-elect. We've got today being January 3rd, 17 days and counting till the inauguration, where we're promised an onslaught of punishments and abuses. Probably not, maybe not, but there's things we can do as Canadians to make sure we protect our economy and our society. That's our job. What he does, that's up to him. We in Canada stand together, and we're firm, and we must negotiate from strength. We recognize that this prelude of threats of 25% tariffs on everything and some really quite, talk about bizarre Canada bashing, that a president-elect would suggest he's going to seize parts of other sovereign countries, take the Panama Canal back, or maybe buy Greenland. This is not serious stuff. Yet we have to take very seriously that President-elect Donald Trump has Canada in his crosshairs. Single biggest trading partner. Historically, great ally, great neighbor, good friend. That's what Canada has been to the U.S. and what the U.S. has always been to us. So the tariff threats are real, but we have to negotiate from strength. And that means from the get-go making clear that we don't go it alone and cut out Mexico. We're renegotiating COSMA. We do it from strength. We do it from the evidence that is clear. That as much as, by the way, back in the 1988 election, I was with John Turner on don't go for this free trade deal with the U.S. will be subsumed. I think Canadians now as a country, we've shifted to recognizing that it turned out that creating an economic trading unit in North America with Canada, Mexico, and the United States has been, for the most part, to our mutual advantage. If anything, Mexico got the worst of it, which is another reason we can't cut them loose now. Claudia Sheinbaum and the government of Mexico deserve our full support, and we work together because that makes us stronger. We know that isolationism and protectionism, as much as they're now part of Trump's playbook, have never been a Canadian strength. We believe in cooperation, multilateralism, and we negotiate from strength. We listen to President-elect Trump's concerns. We dispute the nonsense that our border is allowing fentanyl and criminals to pour into the United States. We present the evidence to him that that's not the case. We don't need to kowtow. We need to point out to him that trade is not a zero-sum game. The fact that they buy more stuff from us than we buy from them doesn't mean that they're losers. Actually having access to a lot of high-quality goods that they buy at a price that is, especially given the Canadian dollar at the moment, a bargain, doesn't mean they've lost. This is not mercantilism. The trade rules that have been developed for multilateral trade through liberalization and many trading blocs around the world, whether we're looking at the Canada-European trade agreements, Canada to Asia, and certainly COSMA, we know that these relationships matter. Interestingly enough, there was a recent, I'm deviating, I do that. The Economist had a recent column from someone who goes by the nom de plume Charlemagne. Maybe Canada should join the European Union. We have a lot in common. Obviously not geography. We have in common the geography of North America, Canada, U.S., and Mexico, and we negotiate from strength, and we stress that the goods and the resources we sell to the United States benefit their economy enormously. What would U.S. agriculture do without Canadian potash? What would the U.S. economy? I know that some of our premiers are freelancing, and okay, Doug Ford, go for it. But listen, we're not going to cut the U.S. off of energy supplies. we're trading partners. We're not combatants. And that symbiotic relationship of our trade throughout North America needs to be stressed. But as much as Donald Trump has decided to throw out this, I've mentioned Panama Canal, Greenland, and this nonsense, and I think it's time that some Canadian leadership stood up and said, sorry, Donald Trump, as kind as your offer might be, that we should be the 51st state, there's a hard no on that. Clifford Lincoln, former Quebec Environment Minister, had an excellent letter to Donald Trump in yesterday's Montreal Gazette. No, thank you, Mr. Trump. We will not really seek to be, and I quote, ever happy little clams in a magnificent MAGA ocean. Newsflash, Donald Trump, we are not aspiring to be a 51st state. We are already a sovereign country. We are a nation. And anytime anyone looks around the world for the top 10 places to live, Canada's in the top half of the top 10, always. The United States? Never. Even the U.S. News and World Report, which puts together such a list, looks at things like affordability, access to health care, safe streets. Where do you want to live? Canada. Our Olympic athletes, when climbing the podium, don't stand up there and sing, oh, to be somewhere down the list after Puerto Rico. No. We sing the true north, strong and free. We stand on guard, O Canada. We stand on guard for thee. So no matter how many Trump photos of him in business suits striding a Swiss mountain he posts with a Canadian flag, we're not intimidated. So I read a lot, and I say, okay, people who know Trump in business deals say this is his tactic before negotiation. Humiliation, business approach. Okay, so I take offense. We do not strive to be the 51st state. We're a G7 country. We are part of the world as an independent, sovereign nation. So no, sorry. And I really also take offense, sorry, Mr. Trump, took offense to your idea that Pierre Poilievre wasn't good enough to lead the Conservatives. Wayne Gretzky, I mean, he's great. He is the great one. He skates to where the puck is going. It's not going to MAGA. The puck is on a Canadian ice rink. And by the way, Mr. Trump, please, before making public pronouncements that Wayne Gretzky should run for prime minister, give yourself or get yourself a briefing on the nature of parliamentary democracy, a Westminster parliamentary system, and a constitutional monarchy where no one runs for prime minister. We have elections for members of parliament. We don't get to pick and choose among our billionaire friends for who gets a seat at the cabinet table. If they're not an elected member of parliament, well, Canadian system is different from that of the United States of America. I suggest that Mr. Trump find one of his grandchildren's school books and look at the year 1776, which may explain a few things to him about why our systems of government are different. I don't want to belittle Mr. Trump, but on the other hand, hey, Donald, have we got a deal for you? You think we want to be the 51st state? Nah, but maybe California would like to be the 11th province. How about it? California, Oregon, Washington, you've got geography in common with us. And not only that, we've already got a carbon trading system between California and Quebec. We've got some strong alliances on our west coast from British Columbia. There's been a lot of academic papers on the idea of Cascadia. So California, Governor Newsom, and Washington State, Jay Inslee, and newly elected Governor of Oregon, Tina Kotek. How about it? Want to put a referendum to your citizens? Because this is what you deal. Have we got a deal for you? This is what you get. Free health care. Universal free health care. No more one-year-olds who suddenly fall off the Medicaid list and their parents are in the news because they're trying to do a GoFundMe so they can get their daughter to a doctor. Universal free health care. And guess what? Those gun laws that your Congress is too afraid to pass because of the national gun lobby, we already got our strict gun laws. That's why we have the safest streets around the world, or at least in the United States, by the way, the most recent stats, 5.9 out of every 100,000 people is killed in a fatal gun incident versus 0.88 per 100,000 in Canada. That's because we have strict gun laws. California citizens, Oregon, Washington, safer streets. Here we already have good gun laws, and women have a right to an abortion. under our universal health care system. But, we don't have to stop there. Donald, think about it. You could get rid of all these states that always vote Democrat. You know what else will take Bernie Sanders off your hands? Proud new Canadian citizen of the great province of Vermont. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. We'd love to see you. Our maritime provinces already have deep, deep links and ties. Well, enough kidding around. But honestly, President Trump, get used to it. Canada is a sovereign nation full of, guess what, proud Canadians. We're not jingoistic. We don't boast a lot. That's one of the things we kind of have in common with Jimmy Carter. We're not a big nation for braggarts and bullies. We actually like to think we're of service in the world. We could do better. We can always do better. But we love our country. And it's a country. It's a nation. And we do not aspire to be a 51st state. So let's not hear that anymore. If it was a joke, it was never funny. And it ends now. Thanks.
Yeah. So you're saying there that Canada needs a strong leader to kind of push back on the next president's musings. With the position the Prime Minister is in right now, do you think he's capable of being that leader?
Sure, because we're a country. We're not, as I said before, we're not a republic with a president. Our head of state is not our Prime Minister. Our head of state, actually, and a lot of Canadians will find it a continual anachronism, that our head of state is King Charles III. We are not a country that relies on a prime minister solely for leadership. We can pull together. We have 10 provinces, 3 territories, 5 different parties in parliament. Quebec, too. We are in this together to have a unified front to make sure that going into negotiations, the United States understands that we're not wannabe 51st staters here, wherever you look. So obviously, to your question, obviously Justin Trudeau's position is tenuous. That doesn't mean Canada's position is tenuous.
And just picking up on that, obviously we saw over the holidays the growing calls for the Prime Minister to resign. You've served alongside him for quite some time. I'm wondering what your advice would be to him right now. Do you think he should resign?
Look, it is a question, and as leader of the Green Party of Canada, I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to the next election to win as many seats for Greens as possible. I think the Prime Minister obviously has to consider his role as leader of the Liberal Party, but I do think that's an internal question for Liberals, and that's why I'm hesitant to weigh in on it. I'm not in his shoes. And I think that the resignation of Chrystia Freeland and the circumstances under which she was dismissed from his cabinet right before the fall economic statement calls into question Justin Trudeau's judgment. And that's an interpersonal matter as well as a question of judging how you treat your fellow cabinet members, human beings, caucus members, etc. But it's up to the Prime Minister as leader of the Liberal Party, and it's up to the Liberal Party to decide. I do think it's important to note that the Reform Act, which I supported, which was originally a private member's bill from Michael Chong back in the days of Harper, and the goal there was to reduce the power of the Prime Minister. And we've seen the power of Prime Ministers grow and grow and grow. I think that that's a key question for Canadians, regardless of who's in that office. But the Liberal Party, as a caucus, rejected the chance they should have seized after the election to say, because it's a caucus decision, right? After every election, under the Reform Act, which amended the Parliament of Canada Act, every caucus has an opportunity to say, we'd like our caucus to be able to do what in every other Commonwealth country is taken for granted, that the caucus of elected members of Parliament can remove a leader who no longer is their choice. That's how Margaret Thatcher was replaced with John Major. That's how in Australia, Rudd came back into power after Julia Gillard had lost her support within the caucus. For some reason, we allowed ourselves to be Americanized to the extent that political parties choose their leaders and the caucus has a reduced role. I certainly think Liberals should think about at the end of the next election. You ought to support the Reform Act. You ought to adopt it. And it is an irony that only the Conservative Party chose to be the most respectful for grassroots democracy. It goes without saying that within the Green Party, that's the way our system works, because we're a grassroots party and the leader doesn't have powers over MPs, and that's why we don't have whipped votes. We're a very different party. But for the others, you really ought to look at adopting the Reform Act so you don't find yourself ever again in a situation where demonstrably the caucus is not any longer supporting its leader, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Just a clarification. I believe earlier you mentioned that party leaders would need to come out and be more clear that Canada would never become a 51st state. I think Pierre Poilievre actually before Christmas had come out and said that. But just regarding this press conference, earlier you mentioned about talking about Canada negotiating from a position of strength, but then you referenced Doug Ford's tour of the United States and said that Ontario would never cut power to the United States. Is that not compromising Canada's bargaining position in a certain respect by saying that things that the premiers are saying would happen as a consequence to tariffs won't actually come to pass?
Look, we're in a situation right now where I think the premiers have, and Chrystia Freeland's resignation letter also highlighted this, the premiers have stepped up. I question how helpful it is for Daniel Smith to be curring favor at Mar-a-Lago. I question whether frankly, in terms of climate action, it would be a great idea to not send unprocessed bitumen to the United States, process it in Canada. We could improve our productivity enormously as a country if we didn't send any raw resources as exports. Raw logs, raw bitumen, we should be processing here first and only exporting value-added product. But that's another whole conversation. Doug Ford is famously Doug Ford, and if he's going to freelance a bit, he gets the U.S.'s attention, and most Canadians, I think, like it, but it's not a real negotiating position.
And just, we've heard a lot of talk about a Team Canada approach, particularly from the federal government. Holding conferences like this where the party leaders are speaking directly to the Trump administration, as you've done here, can that not come off as to the Trump administration as a little antagonistic?
Oh, I hope so. I really...
And so how does that help Canada's bargaining position?
I don't think Donald Trump is acting as a president-elect should act. Given the importance of the trading relationship, given the historic alliance and allyship of the United States and Canada through 2 world wars, through shared struggles and many imperfections, it's so out of keeping with the respect that one would give the office of President of the United States to see a president-elect decide to make jokes that are so disrespectful. So I think that to the extent that Donald Trump notices anything the leader of the Green Party of Canada says, I'd be astonished, but I'd also be pleased, because I think a lot of Canadians want to hear someone say clearly and out loud, as I referenced former Minister of Environment from Quebec, whom I'm honored to say is an old friend, Clifford Lincoln. God bless Clifford Lincoln for saying clearly in the Montreal Gazette, look, thanks, Mr. Trump, but no thanks. We do not want to be the 51st state. More Canadian leaders need to stand up and say it really clearly. It's not a funny joke. It's not funny at all. We're a sovereign nation, and maybe we should get Donald Trump some free tickets to go see Come From Away. We are a good neighbor and a good friend of the United States of America, and we always will be, no matter who's rotating through the Oval Office. But that doesn't mean that you can denigrate us and think that humiliation is a tactic for trade negotiation. Respect, mutual respect, evidence-based decision-making, and understanding the benefits, the mutual benefits, the symbiotic relationship that our economies have when we function at our best. That's in Canada's interest, and it's also in the United States' interest.
Would you want an election now or as soon as possible for a new mandate to deal with the Trump administration?
I think not, because what happens with an election is that there is then only a caretaker role for whatever government is in place during the time that the Trump White House is forming. Obviously, we're going to have an election sooner than later, but your question was as soon as possible. I think we're going to look at each confidence vote as it comes up, and as Greens, as I said, we don't have whip votes, but we'll discuss whatever confidence vote there is. Personally, I haven't voted confidence in a Liberal budget since they bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's another question altogether. But the question of, do we function best as a country in dealing with a newly inaugurated President Trump. If we're in the midst of an election, probably not.
Have there been other meetings amongst the party leaders like we saw last month where the Prime Minister brought all the party leaders together to update them on the relationship with the United States?
No, we've had meetings like that, but they're relatively rare. The last meeting, I thought back to this because it was Candice Bergen was leading the Conservative Party the last time we'd had sort of everybody all huddle in together, and it
Last month, all the party leaders met in the press.
in person.
Okay.
That's the first, and we haven't had an update since. I hope we will do that again. I found it was very productive.
Have you had conversations with the Prime Minister at all on U.S. relations since that meeting, even one-on-one?
Trying to think back. Nothing you could call a full conversation. No. But we do run into each other and suggest how we might do a better job, some Team Canada ideas, what we could do together to make it really clear to the United States that we are a solid and reliable trading partner, and that multilateralism and an economic order with rules is in everybody's interests. Trump is an outlier in returning to positions that are essentially a mercantile view of the world of isolationism and protectionism. There've got to be people who are within earshot of Donald Trump to acquaint him with what benefits the U.S. has accrued, what benefits the world has accrued from reducing isolationism and protectionism and moving towards multilateralism and an understood trading regime that has rules.
Have you had any assurance from this government that they are looking to closely work with Mexico in the face of a new Trump administration, or you think they're pivoting away from Mexico?
Everything I've heard from them suggests that they're not pivoting away from Mexico, but I wanted to make it very clear, and I did in that meeting with the other leaders, that we have to support Mexico's role, because it also, heck, Saskatchewan has a trade office in Mexico. There's an awful lot of Canadian goods and resources and farmers and workers in Canada who also benefit from our trading relationship with Mexico. I mentioned Mexico probably got the worst of it out of NAFTA because the hit on their agrarian economy, the loss of so many Mexican farmers who lost their farms, who were growing corn and corn dumping from the U.S. and all of that, and the creation of maquiladoras hurt Mexican labor standard, hurt the Mexican environment. At this point, especially with an incoming new Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who needs a lot of support, Mexico's society is in the throes of too much influence from organized crime and violence. Claudia Sheinbaum, if people don't know, is a climate scientist and former mayor of Mexico City, brought in really important climate policies. She's a strong ally on other issues too, and we need to make sure that we're not cutting Mexico loose or throwing Mexico under Trump's bus.
If Trump comes into office and he drops the tariffs that we've been hearing for a while, what should Canada do next in reaction?
Well, I think what the playbook from the first Trump administration is a good one to go to. We worked hard on U.S. allies where we knew we had them, governors from states that would be hurt and were hurt by increased tariffs on Canadian goods. We worked hard to make the case, and we brought in some countervailing tariffs of our own that were targeted and sent the message clearly. We worked through it, and then we ended up with a renegotiated CUSMA that landed Canada, I think, even in a better position than the first NAFTA. So, and again, Chrystia Freeland's experience there, heck, if you were a Canadian politician, which frankly I am, nothing recommends you more strongly, I think, to the Canadian public than President-elect Donald Trump saying you're toxic. Chrystia Freeland must have done a heck of a job as a negotiator for Trump to remember her so clearly. I do think that that's, again, probably a game plan. What we talked about in that room was who knows whom. Obviously, all of us have contacts within our different parties through different relationships with different people who are in U.S. politics. Canadian politicians tend to know U.S. politicians. It's North America is bigger than Canada alone, but we do tend to know people who know people, and it's important that we present a solid front.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut la
Merci tout le
conférence.
monde.